everyone who is joining us for webinar number 161 since the Andean Health Organization, Hipólito Unano Agreement, started the webinar series in May 2020. To begin with, we will give two key messages. First, the COVID-19 pandemic has caused the largest vaccination setback. It is critical to intensify efforts to catch up with vaccination to address the vaccination setback and expand services to reach girls and boys who have missed out vaccination. Second, the COVID-19 pandemic positioned health and health sovereignty as key to development. The capacities built and strengthened in these 3 years should not be rolled back. Research, epidemiological and genomic surveillance, development of vaccines and drugs, deployment of prevention measures, and good communication remain fundamental for a caring society. Under this premise, the Andean Health Organization is very clear about its coordinating role and continues to open dialogues and interventions with the cooperation of all sectors to ensure a dignified life to the inhabitants of our countries. Preserving progress, acting accordingly with what has been learned, and keeping health at the center depends on the political will and social conscience to unite for the common good. Reflections on these and other topics relevant to health and well-being can be found in the monthly edition of the Noti Salud Andinas newsletter available on the Andean Health Organization webpage. We invite you to leave your name, organization, and country in the comment box of the Facebook live chat or YouTube live chat. In the same space, you can leave your questions or send in via email to webinarhorasconu@gmail.com. In this webinar, we will follow the usual dynamics. We will start with institutional greeting, followed by the lectures of our speakers, and then we will move on to the Q&A session. To access the certificate of attendance, as usual, in any of the chats of Facebook Live or YouTube Live chat, you will find a fixed link. You must fill out a brief survey and then leave your data for the issuance of the certificate. It will be sent in the coming days to your emails. To start this important day, I give the floor to Dr. Marisela Malki, Deputy Secretary of the Andean Health Organization, who will give the welcome and institutional greeting. Go ahead, Dear Dr. Marisela. Thank you, Bertita. Good morning, good afternoon, welcome to all of you who are following us in this webinar. On this occasion, we will talk about an important topic related to social justice, that precisely on February 20, the world celebrated the Day of Social Justice, an expression built in the world of labor and workers' movement, 19th century, when the process of institutionalization of the capitalistic market removed the few existing protections for workers and imposed the logic of individual risk management. As far as we know, in the Europe,
individuos adquirían derechos de libertad, pero las condiciones materiales
material conditions were concentrated in the hands of a few, and inequality and poverty appear in industrial cities, and with it, diseases and epidemics. In the perception of the people who lived in this situation, it was unfair for a society to speak of right to freedom, but in reality, individuals did not have the material conditions to be free. The lessons learned in the 19th century was that without equal conditions, it is not possible to be free, because freedom begins with the health and education of individuals, and of course, with the right to work.
Por el derecho al trabajo. Llegado ya al siglo XX, la guerra, las crisis económicas y la gripe española de los años 20 mostrarían la falacia del liberalismo individualista decimonónico.
In the 20th century, the world economic crisis and the Spanish flu of the 20s would show the fallacy of 19th century individualistic liberalism. And after the 30s, structural change in politics and economies will consolidate, giving rise to the social rule of the solidarity starts appear as a key value for overcoming the ravages of war, and labor-related rights were fundamental to shaping a system that could overcome economic and political crises. This was how the social state of law emerged, a state that made social rights its backbone, since full employment allowed the right to work to materialize, and subsidies for health, education, and housing needs would, according to Keynes, mean that workers would not have to spend all their wages on basic needs and could gradually become consumers of what they produce in the industries, energizing the economy and allowing growth based on redistribution. That is, on equality of positions, as Dubé has. In European countries, equality made possible by the welfare state led to the post-war golden years in these democratic societies, which made solidarity and social justice a priority. With the arrival of the 21st century and with the COVID-19 pandemic, we find ourselves almost as we did 100 years ago, in an unequal and unjust world, subjected to a forced individualization of risk, and thus countries without health sovereignty and individuals in conditions of informal work and without economic autonomy comply with mandatory isolation, aspects that constitute a disastrous sum that has been expressed in lethality during the pandemic. After leaving this event, today it is necessary in the world to rethink social justice, the benefits redistribution, and the true social rule of law, since equality of positions is again necessary to begin to redefine democracy. Because without the right of health, there's no right to life. This has been possible only through the materialization of social justice through redistribution carried out by the social rule of law, a materialization that we consider is urgent for the Latin American region. In this regard, the Andean Health Organization, the Polytunani Agreement, carrying out this webinar in order to generate a reflection space on the conceptual framework of social justice and to show the experiences that the Andean countries are developing to reduce health qualities, advance in exercise of rights and social justice. For that, in this occasion, we have the participation of Dr. Francois Dubé and the representatives of the Andean Roundtable from each of the Andean countries, and we thank them for sharing their knowledge and experience. A special greetings to Federico Arnilles, who's the chairman of the Intersectorial Andean Roundtable for Fight Against Poverty. And I also welcome each one of you and to all of you who are joining us from different parts of the world week after week in this space we have in our institution. Thank you. Thank you very much, dear Dr. Marisela. After the greeting of our Deputy Executive Secretary, I introduce myself. My name is Berta Luis Pineda, sociologist, coordinator of climate change and social inequalities of health in the Andean Health Organization. Today, I will gladly be in charge of moderating this webinar. After this preamble, we welcome Professor François Dubé, French sociologist, professor emeritus at the University of Bordeaux, director of the School of Advanced Studies in Social Sciences in France. He has published books such as the following: Social Justice and Inequality at School, Sociology of School Experience, School of Opportunities, What is a Fair School? The Decline of the Institution, Rethinking Social Justice Against the Myth of Equal Opportunity. Why do we prefer inequality? What united us? How do we live together from a positive recognition of difference? The age of sad passions. How this unequal world leads to frustration and resentment and discourages the struggle for a better society. Dear Professor, thank you so much for participating as a speaker in this webinar. You have the space.
Bien, je vous remercie de m'avoir invité. Je vais répéter ce qu'a dit
Thank you for this kind invitation, and I would like
d'une autre manière.
to repeat what Marisela has mentioned, but in a different way. I would like to start by telling you that most of the time sociologists and experts measure inequality with data, in some cases increase, in others decreases, and we frequently are in the middle. And I think that we need to ask ourselves a different question, not only ask if inequalities are increasing or decreasing, and which ones increase and which ones are decreasing. I believe that inequalities, in any case, in the old Europe where I live, the inequalities have changed in their nature. And I would like to comment that important inequalities are not just between the richest and the rest of society. So the actors are also more closer and smaller inequalities. And not only, as one frequently says, an inequality that puts all the planet against some billionaires. So it is important to consider the small inequalities, since these small inequalities are the ones that create this feeling of injustice and create social movements, protests, and not only to look at the economic aspect of things. For almost a century in the countries of the North, we leave behind a representation of inequalities forged in social classes. When I was a student and they asked what were the inequalities, shown the workers class, the rich class, the inequalities. The class inequalities were mostly defined in terms of work, the relationship of exploitation, but the inequalities were around labor and labor work, and essentially in the scope of the labor, there was the issue of income, lifestyles, the level of consumption, the work position of women. All the inequalities were around the moral, and during a century, we've learned that this was the inequality, and we're always told the same: social classes and the different inequality. And when a sociologist found a correlation between the social classes, and the sociologist thought that they found they did their job by explaining the social life through social classes. But those classes was not just a set of statistics. They were also made up by communities that were made up by us, the workers, against them, the rich, the farmers against the urban people. And there was no awareness of class. The class awareness created collective identities, and the advantage was that social class awareness protected us from this feeling of rejection. The social qualification was based on the class itself and not person. This representation of society by itself, to the point of not seeing inequalities that are not class inequalities per se. These were inequalities or a certain level. For example, inequalities between men and women were considered secondary inequalities. Among the French workers and British workers and German workers, they were also considered some type of secondary inequality. No, they existed, but they were not at the heart of the society. And this representation of the society has created a political representation that's quite simple. The workers vote on the left, and the bourgeois and the Catholic, traditional Catholics will vote for the right. In that is, we can see that in Italy, in Germany, in France, and the UK. We have a political life represents approximately by the different social classes. This state of society that was important for sociology because it's the society on which different authors reflected, and here social justice is in first place the reduction of inequalities between social positions. Social justice is that the rich give part of their wealth to the workers. The bourgeois provide part of their wealth to the working class because the society is considered a sort of organization where the social actors act with solidarity because they have debt and they should provide to the others taxes, public services, free education, free health. So we have this image that we've lived for between 1950 and 1990 in a system of social democracy, and the justice is the social organization. And the social progress at the end is a progressive decrease of inequalities. But I would like to mention that this worked. These inequalities were significantly reduced, and we know that in these last 30 years, that system is falling apart because the society or the production world has changed completely due to what we call globalization, the opening of international markets. The working class has increased,
une vieille société de
They
classe
have multiplied
industrielle, en tout cas dans les vieux pays industriels que
in
sont
an old
les
industrial
pays d'Europe
social
ou encore
class countries,
de l'Amérique.
such as the
C'est
countries
lié
of
aussi à
Europe or the
l'économie
US.
nationale.
They have
Vous
moved
avez
from the
par exemple
national
des
economy
ordinateurs chinois,
because we
américains,
have
japonais, également
computers
des vêtements chinois.
from Japan,
Nous,
from China.
nous produisons pour la planète, nous
The
achetons pour
clothes
la totalité de
comes
la
from
planète,
China now.
alors que le capitalisme
We buy from all
dit de la
countries throughout the
social-démocratie
globe,
était un capitalisme national
while
pour
the
l'essentiel, avec des industries
capitalism was a
nationales, des
national
marchés
capitalism
nationaux.
with national industries
Le
for
grand
national
changement
markets.
ici, c'est
And the major change
le patron, le capitaliste n'est plus le
has been
propriétaire. Aujourd'hui,
that the
l'économie
capitalist is no longer
est
the
devenue une économie
owner.
financière.
The
On a
economy at present has become
rencontré
a
dans l'histoire
financial economy.
le patron de
For
l'usine,
many
c'est
years,
lui qui organisait le travail de
the
l'usine.
owner of the
Aujourd'hui, c'est
factory
lui qui organise
organized
le
labor
travail de
inside
l'usine.
the
Il n'est pas
factory.
le
But
patron
now the one who
de
organized
l'usine, elle appartient
the work in the
à un
factory is
PSE.
no longer the
Et
owner.
très souvent, on ne sait pas
This place
ce qu'ils font.
belongs to a fund, and we
Donc,
don't even know who
voilà,
the owner is anymore.
ce monde a changé et ce monde a changé aussi
Therefore,
parce
the world
que
has changed
les vieilles
and
sociétés
has changed
européennes qui
because
vivaient comme des sociétés nationales
the old
en Angleterre,
European
par exemple,
societies
en
live
Allemagne, il y a
as
des
national
Allemands, en
societies.
France, il y a des
In the
Français,
UK, you have
et les
English.
étrangers
In
sont
France, you
devenus
have
des
French.
travailleurs
And
immigrés
the
américains,
foreigners
anglais,
become
allemands, français. C'est fini.
migrant workers.
Aujourd'hui,
And
nous
then
sommes
they
dans une
become
société
Germans
pluriculturelle.
or
Il y a des
English.
métis
But now
partout.
we have a pluricultural
Il y a des
society.
minorités partout. Au fond,
We have
plus
minorities
personne n'imagine
everywhere.
que tous les travailleurs qui viendront en France
And nobody can
seront
imagine that
catholiques et
all
français.
workers who come to
C'est
France
fini.
were
D'ailleurs,
Catholics and
France n'est plus
French.
catholique.
That's no longer the case. And
Ce
French are
monde
no
a
longer
changé
Catholic.
et en même
That
temps, il y a
world
eu un affaiblissement
has crumbled
considérable
down
de ces
and at the
minorités
same time
et
a
le
significant weakening of the
résultat de cette mutation
syndicates,
qui est extrêmement
and an output
étonnante,
of
c'est
this
que
mutation
aujourd'hui, les
is
classes populaires ne
amazing
votent
and
plus pour le
incredible.
right,
Now the
elles votent
popular classes
à
don't
droite,
vote anymore for the
l'extrême droite.
right, they
Et
vote for the
les
extreme
classes
right.
sociales qui votent à gauche sont
And the
plutôt la
social
population
categories that vote
urbaine,
for the left
diplômée,
are the
et
urban
il y a un renversement complet.
people who have a
Le
diploma.
baccalauréat,
There's
je
been a
pourrais
total change
préciser
of
en
the
disant que dans nos pays,
those who
c'est le
elect
diplôme
people.
qui devient le
And we
facteur
could point out
déterminant
that in our countries,
les
the
gens vont
diploma
aller voter
becomes the determinant factor of the
au
vote
centre
of
pour les
people
partis libéraux.
with
Mon
qualifications. They
génération,
will vote for the center or the liberal countries or environmental
pour les
parties.
partis
And those who
d'extrême
don't
droite
have a diploma
ou les
don't
partis
vote,
qu'on
or
appelle
they vote for
les
parties of the
bon, là, c'est
extreme
pour les
right,
Américains, le mot n'a pas le même
or
sens,
those
qu'on appelle populiste.
for the Latin
Ça fait
Americans.
partie
It doesn't have
populiste,
the same
évidemment,
sense. What we call them
qu'il y a eu
populist parties,
en
but
Amérique
it's
latine.
not the
Donc,
populism
ce
that
monde
we see
est
in
en train
Latin
de
America.
disparaître complètement
So this world is
et la
changing.
nature des inégalités a complètement changé.
Nature of
L'expérience des
inequalities has changed
inégalités a complètement changé.
completely. The experience of
D'abord,
inequality has changed
là où les
completely.
inégalités
In first
convergeaient
place,
autour des classes sociales,
where
les
the
inégalités se sont
inequalities converge
fractionnées.
due to social
C'est
classes,
visible
the
et
inequality
chaque
has
individu peut dire
broken
qu'il est
down, and
inégal,
each person
plus ou moins
may say
inégal en fonction
that there is
d'un certain critère.
unequal
Par
in
exemple,
terms
le
of
revenu,
certain
la
criteria.
félicité,
For example,
le
income,
diplôme, le
safety,
sexe,
diplomas,
l'origine, l'âge.
gender, origin, age.
Chacun de nous devient inégal en tant qu'il est
Each
quelque
one
chose
of
de
us are
particulier.
unequal
Donc,
because there's something
alors que les
specific
inégalités
to us.
convergeaient dans les classes
And while
sociales, elles se fractionnent, elles
inequalities
s'atomisent d'une certaine
tend to
façon.
be in social classes now,
Le
it's been
vocabulaire des sociologues actuels
atomized,
s'est relâché.
and the
Ils ont
vocabulary of
conscience de la
sociologists
classe sociale.
there's been a relaxation of social classes, but in reality, we no longer talk about social classes as Marx spoke. We talk inferior class, superior class, the rich, the poor,
c'est plus vraiment des classes sociales avec une culture de classe,
but they're no longer social class
etc.
with a
Et au fond,
class identity or
les
cultures.
individus
No
ont le
longer the case.
sentiment d'être
And
inégaux.
actually,
En
people
tant
have the feeling of being
Alors, comment
unequal.
expliquer ça? Je crois que
So
ce qui
how
est
to
vraiment
explain
décisif
all of
dans le
this? Well,
passé,
I think that there's been
c'est que
a change
alors
that
que la
occurred,
reproduction des
and
inégalités
that was
fonctionnait
that
comme un destin
to the
social.
extent that the
Si je suis ouvrier,
inequality work
si
as a
mon père est
social,
ouvrier, pardonnez-moi, je serai
I
ouvrier.
will be a worker if
Si
my
mon
father is
père
a
est
worker, and I will
paysan,
also be
je
a
serai
worker.
paysan.
But my father is a
Aujourd'hui,
farmer, so I will also
les
be a farmer.
inégalités se
Nowadays,
réduisent à travers des
the
parcours individuels.
inequalities
Euh, Ce n'est
are
plus
seen
le destin, ce sont
through
des
the
parcours
personal
individuels.
trajectory. It's
L'exemple
not a
évident est
fate.
celui,
This is
rappelons que
a in
lorsque
an
je sors
equal
de l'école,
journey. And as an
dans
example,
des pays,
we have from the
c'est
one from
encore plus
school,
le cas dans des pays comme le Chili aujourd'hui, vous avez une
and we
école
see that
de
in
masse
countries like in Chile,
et
we
c'est le
see the
parcours scolaire
mass
qui va créer
school,
les
mass
inégalités. Alors,
school,
ce sont des
and the
parcours
school
précis,
trajectory that generates
mais ce sont des
inequalities,
parcours
a
individuels.
very
J'ai
unequal
réussi, j'ai
roads that
échoué,
are
et si
individual.
j'étais à ce
I was
niveau,
successful,
je
I
serais ailleurs.
failed, I
C'est plus des
got to
destins
this
sociaux.
level, I did not make
On
it.
observe exactement la
It's
même
not
chose dans la
fate,
santé.
but it's your
Les
journey.
inégalités de
And we
santé
see
dans
the
les pays
same in the area
riches,
of health,
dans
health
les pays
inequalities.
dont je viens,
In rich
on
countries
ne
where I come
compare
from,
les gens qui sont soignés
for example,
et bien
people who
nourris
receive
aux gens qui ne
healthcare,
sont pas soignés
well
et
fed,
malheureux.
those who do not
C'est ça,
receive
c'est ça. Ce
healthcare
sont
are
des
malnourished.
inégalités de
It
parcours
is
de
not
vie,
as simple as
d'un
that.
travail
It's
pénible,
an
d'une
inequality in their life
alimentation
journey. I
déséquilibrée.
have a difficult
Je
job.
fume,
I don't
je
eat
bois de
well.
l'alcool,
I smoke. I
j'ai
drink some
accès
alcohol.
à des médecins de moins bonne qualité, et
I
à la
have
fin,
access
il
to
y a 10 ans
lower
d'écart de vie
quality drugs. And at the
entre
end,
une femme cadre et
difference
un
of
homme
10 years
ouvrier.
of life
Ce n'est
expectancy
pas une
between
inégalité
an
brutale,
executive
c'est une
woman
inégalité
and a worker,
qui se,
labor
qui se produit dans des
worker.
parcours.
This is an
Donc,
inequality that's generated
on
throughout
va
this
voir, au
journey of
fond,
this
des
person, or their
inégalités
trajectory.
qui sont
And that
transférées
is why
sur
we're
les
going to
individus.
see
Aujourd'hui, ce sont les
inequalities
individus qui
that are
sont
transferred to
responsables des
people, and the
inégalités.
people
C'est
who
eux qui
are
sont responsables de la
responsible
santé.
of
C'est
inequality.
eux qui
They
sont
are the ones
responsables
responsible
de
of
leur
their
succès ou
health.
de leur échec
They're
scolaire.
responsible
De la même
of
manière
their
que c'est eux qui
success
sont
or
responsables
school failure,
de la stabilité de leur vie conjugale.
of
Divorce
their
ou ne
life
divorce pas,
stability in the marriage,
etc., etc.
we divorce or not,
Et dans cette société-là, le
etc.
modèle, le vieux modèle
And in
de
this
justice,
society, the old
de
model
l'égalité
of
des
justice
classes, la réduction des
that was
inégalités de position
the
a été
reduction of
remplacée par un
inequality
modèle
has
absolument
been
antithetique,
replaced for a model
qui est
by a
celui
model
de l'égalité des chances.
whose
La société juste
of
n'est
the
plus la société qui
equality
réduit
of
les inégalités
opportunities is no longer the one who reduces
entre les
inequalities
ouvriers, les riches et les pauvres, c'est celle
between
où
the
quelque
labor
chacun
force
aura
and
la
the
même
rich,
chance que
but
les autres
instead each one
d'accéder
would
à
have
toutes
the
ces
same
positions.
opportunity of others to have
Donc,
access to all social
on n'est plus dans
positions.
un monde où on a
We're no
les
longer
exploiteurs
in
et
a
les
world
exploités, mais les vainqueurs
where
et les
we
vaincus
have those
de la
who are
compétition
exploiter and
pour la
exploiters,
élite
but we now have
sociale
winners and
et
losers
l'élite économique. On est
around their
vraiment dans un
school
monde
success or economic success.
anti-scientifiquement libéral,
And we have now a model
puisque, au
in a
fond,
very
on voit
literal
la
sense
société comme un système de
in
compétition entre
we
les
see
individus
society
et la société juste,
as
c'est
a
la société dans
competition
laquelle la
among
compétition
people.
serait
And the
équilibrée.
first society is one
Évidemment,
where the
dans ce
competition
cas, les inégalités qui résultent de cette compétition
more
équilibrée
equity,
seraient,
and
eux,
those
fair
inequalities that are generated
fair
by this
puisque
competition would
un
be
peu comme dans
fair
le sport,
inequalities.
il est normal que le
Such in
vainqueur
the case of sports,
ramasse la prime,
it is
que le vainqueur
normal
dans
to
une
see
compétition sportive
that the winner gets the
gagne
best
la prime du match.
and
Donc,
takes
on
everything.
a changé
with him or her the best price.
Et dans ce modèle, évidemment,
So we have made a total change of model, and in this model,
dominante, c'est le sentiment d'être
the
discriminé.
dominant emotion
Et
is
les
the
injustices qui montent
feeling
sur le devant de la scène,
discriminated. The
ces
injustices
injustices
that
qui oppriment
emerge
les travailleurs
are no longer the injustice that put
mais
the
les
worker
discriminés,
against the boss,
ceux qui ne sont pas
as
discriminés,
here the
les
groups that
femmes,
feel
les
discriminated
immigrés,
versus those who are not,
les musulmans,
women,
les jeunes,
immigrants,
les vieux,
Muslims,
les malades,
the young,
etc. Chacun
the
peut se
ill.
sentir discriminé
Each
parce qu'il n'a pas eu les mêmes
one may
chances que les autres
feel
pour
discriminated
réussir
because they
dans
didn't
la
have the
vie
same
sociale.
opportunity as
Et
others
donc,
or was
en
successful
même
in
temps
their
que
social
chacun se sent
life.
discriminé,
Therefore, at the same time that each
chacun
one
se sent
feels
méprisé.
discriminated,
Et le sentiment d'être
we
méprisé,
also feel that we are not
d'être
valued.
représenté par les catégories
And
politiques,
this
par les acteurs
rejection of
politiques, est un
feeling
sentiment
of not being respected
absolument
by
dominant
political
en Europe
actors,
aujourd'hui,
this is a very
très
dominant feeling.
majoritaire.
And today,
Et nous
Europe,
avons des partis
this is quite significant, and therefore we have
populistes d'extrême droite, pour dire les choses,
pop
en
populist parties
Italie,
of
en
extreme right.
Allemagne, en France,
We see that
en
in
Angleterre,
Italy, in
y
Germany,
compris dans
in
les pays
France,
scandinaves, où
in
c'est très
England,
flagrant, en
even in
Pologne,
the
en Hongrie,
Scandinavian countries, which is
la protestation
surprising.
sociale n'est plus
In
portée
Poland
par
and Hungary,
le désir
social
d'égalité,
demonstrations or
mais par
protests is not
la
to be
lutte
equal,
contre les
but
discriminations
instead
et le
is the
sentiment
fight
d'être
against
méprisé.
discrimination and this feeling
Cette mutation, il faut bien le
of
dire, a
being
été
rejected.
considérablement renforcée par Internet.
And this has
Parce
been
que
reinforced through
les
the
écrans,
internet
les réseaux, les technologies
because the networks and
font
technology
aujourd'hui des mouvements
of
sociaux qui n'ont pas
communications
besoin de partis,
lead
qui n'ont
to
pas besoin de
social
syndicats,
movements that don't
mais
require
qui se
parties
font
or
simplement
unions
manifester
who are
sur mon ordinateur, sur mon écran. Et
created
on a eu
to
en France un
protest
mouvement
through
extraordinaire
my laptop.
qui a été le
And in
mouvement des
France,
Gilets
we've
jaunes,
had
qui a
incredible amounts
provoqué
of the movements of the yellow
les grandes
jackets
villes,
or yellow
où il
vests,
n'y avait
where every
aucune
weekend
organisation, aucun leader,
in the
il
major
y avait
cities,
des
there
individus
was no organization or leader,
qui
just
appelaient
people
à manifester
who were
sur,
angry,
sur leurs ordinateurs et
who
sur leur
want to
téléphone et
protest,
qui n'avaient pas besoin de partis, pas besoin de syndicats, etc.
and that they didn't need a union or a
Aujourd'hui,
party. They just
c'est un
protest
peu
through
paradoxal
a
parce
call
que
through their
la
computer or cell phones.
solidarité, la solidarité
Something
générée
very special because the
tous ces
solidarity
groupes
generated
discriminés sont des groupes concurrents.
was threatened
Il n'y a pas
because all
d'union.
these
Pour employer
discriminated
le
groups
langage politique, il n'y a pas de convergence
are the
de lutte.
competition.
Les femmes luttent dans leur coin, les immigrés
There was no
dans leur coin,
convergence in
les
their
jeunes dans
struggle.
leur coin,
Women on
etc.,
the
etc. Il
one
n'y a pas
hand, immigrants on the other,
rassemblement
the youth on the other
autour
hand,
d'un thème central.
and there's
Et
no
le seul
group that
rassemblement
gets
qui
together
existe est
around
un
the
rassemblement
central topic.
imaginaire
And the
en
only
disant il
meeting
faut réunifier le
is
peuple
this
contre les ennemis du peuple.
imaginary meeting where we need to
Aujourd'hui,
unify the people against the enemy of the people.
les peuples font, c'est tout ce
The
qui,
enemies of the
tout
people
sauf les
are
ennemis
all
du
of
peuple,
those
c'est-à-dire sauf les
except
riches,
everybody else
les
except the
intellectuels,
enemies, the rich, the journalists, the
les juifs, les
intellectuals,
étrangers, enfin,
the
tout ce qui
Jews,
n'est pas le
the
peuple
foreigners,
devient
all of those who are not the people
forge l'identité du
become
peuple. Évidemment, euh, ce peuple-là ne peut
what they
pas
take the
avoir de pouvoir
identity of the
politique parce qu'il est
people.
lui-même divisé,
And
etc.
this population cannot
Je
have a
crois que nous sommes
political
dans un
problem that
moment
in itself
extrêmement
is
étrange
divided. So
où nous
we are a
renversons un
very
modèle de justice
strange
pour un
time
autre modèle de
where we
justice qui est
eliminate
celui de
a
la
model of
reconnaissance.
justice, another
Chacun
one, which is the
a le droit de
quality
réussir,
of
mais
opportunities. Each
évidemment,
one
ce
has a
modèle
right to
ne
be
crée pas de
successful,
solidarité.
and this
C'est pour cette
model
raison
is
que
not generating
les philosophes
solidarity. And
ont
that
appelé
is
à une
why
société équitable.
many
Il faut
philosophers
abandonner l'idée de la société
are
égale
asking
pour la
to abandon
société
the
équitable,
idea
c'est-à-dire
of
pour laquelle
equality in
le
the
travail
society
soit le plus juste possible entre les
because
individus.
the competition will
Je
be
vous
fair. I feel somewhat hostile against, hostile against this transformation because there's discrimination, of course. There are immigrants who are mistreated, there is inequality between men and women. Of course, they exist. The sexual majorities against the sexual minorities, there's also discrimination. But as opposed to the old model, this conflict doesn't call upon solidarity because we don't owe anything to the others. I don't know if you understand what I'm trying to say. When I fight against discrimination, it's fair, but I don't know what I owe the others or the others owe me. And that is why I think that we should accept this new model of justice, but not to abandon the idea that social justice is in first place. We have the growing equality between social positions. When the society is equity, there's less discrimination. That is when the society is open to competition, there may be a lot of inequality, and there we have a problem. The second thing that I would like to comment is that I think that we should be more interested in work, in labor. The old industrial countries will no longer interested in labor or labor conditions. We talk about retirement and salary, but we don't talk in the labor itself. And labor is still this one of the social experiences that is essential. And the other thing I believe is the redistribution mechanisms. That is the fact that we pay taxes, then all these mechanisms be understood because I come from a country where everything is so complicated, bureaucracy is so complicated that nobody understands how it works. And therefore, everybody feeling of not receiving what they deserve or what you have the right to. So the solidarity, well, the school is free, but I know how much this costs to the community. But if I think that the community doesn't have to pay for it and the school is free, there is no solidarity. Everyone has this feeling they're charging too much, perhaps. So the only country that I know in the region is Chile. This is very difficult to see how much people pay or how much people receive. And the third topic that I would like to talk is we will help the groups and not only people. If we reason in terms of health, I think that the progress in the area of health is a progress in terms of nutrition, collective equipment, access to health care is not just a right for a person that can be seen in the best hospitals. We know, and you know well, that the health status of the population is not always linked to the collective expenditure in health. For example, in the US, they have extremely high health expenditure in a level that's much lower than the one we have in Europe. And this is due to individual relationship to the health system. That is why I think that we should remember that social justice is not only to consider suffering and the issues of each problem, it is also trying to establish a system of social retribution of solidarity that each one knows what they owe to the other and what the others owe to one. Thank you very much. I don't know how much time I've spent. Perhaps I exceeded my time. Thank you very much for this invitation. Dear Professor Duvet, thank you very much for your excellent presentation. You've posed us with many challenges and very relevant ideas in relation to the effort that we're doing in the Andean Intersectorial Andean Roundtable for Coordination Against Health Inequalities, because we have decided to measure the inequality, have a baseline of social inequalities. You mentioned something that is very important for us. It's not only to consider economic inequalities, but all those other small inequalities. Very interesting reflection on the concept of social classes, of the reproduction of mechanisms of inequalities. Many of these inequalities are present in the life trajectory of people. The importance and the need to rethink the justice model. There is a critical perspective on the current model in terms of opportunities. It's very important to analyze those small inequalities that made the equality of opportunity so difficult, and therefore you mentioned the importance to consider inequalities with social justice is of fundamental for have better societies. And at the end of the presentation, you highlight the relevance that labor has, and dignified labor, to continue to build societies that have more equity. Thank you very much. We ask you to remain in the room. And now we have some presentations on experiences of the effort made in countries with the intersectorial Andean Roundtable for Coordination Against Inequalities. We would very much like for you to listen to this presentation. So at the end, we would like to hear your comments and suggestions. And we can also give you some of the questions that the audience have sent through YouTube Live and Facebook Live chat. Once again, thank you very much, and please remain in the room. Thank you so much. Now, as we indicated, we would like to welcome the representatives of the Andean Intersectorial Roundtable for Agreement Against Inequality. Please, I would like to remind you very kindly that you have 5 minutes to highlight an experience, significant experience that you are doing in terms of your daily effort in the ministries of health of the Andean country to reduce inequalities and to move ahead in exercising rights and building welfare and social justice in the Andean. Go ahead, dear Vivian Tatiana Camacho, General Director of Traditional Medicine and Ministry of Health and Sports of the Plurinational State of Bolivia. Good morning or good afternoon. Greetings from the plurinational state of Bolivia. Thank you very much to the Andean Health Organization. Thank you for Professor Dubé for his presentation. Thank you for the invitation. Could you help me with the presentation? We're going to share the progress made in Bolivia in terms of the roundtable in 2022 about the health inequalities, but also how can we progress against towards social justice. So from our ministry, we indicate that health is a human health and not a merchandise, and we defend the public and free universal health care, thus promoting our process of change. We're always defending that this human right has to be defended during the pandemic. It was evident that commercialization of medicine, that if you didn't have money, you didn't get any care. And we have witnessed that in several countries throughout the world. But also health beyond a dominant monoculture. In Bolivia, we have the law of traditional and ancestral medicine, and this is an important progress in the fight against the pandemic. From our Office of Traditional Medicine, we've been working with several publications promoting our ancestral knowledge, and we have a telehealth system for traditional medicine. We've also participated with information so we can remember that nutrition is medicine, that the ancestral traditional medicine sees the health as a comprehensive, clean water, clean air, healthy food, and we also promote our traditional medicine preparations to prevent COVID, but also to prevent different diseases. And we have this standardization with more than 150 products of traditional medicine in drugstores that have been recognized by our ministry. Our ancestral traditional medicine is cultural resistance. In Bolivia, we are a majority of farmers and indigenous people, and in Bolivia, we lead in this process in different regions of the Americas because we have a plurality of knowledge that is important, and we need to overcome a monocultural look that's Eurocentric that has been imposed as in terms of health. So we know that ancestral medicine is our cultural resistance, not just folklore or something colorful from the system. This is strength of the people. Traditional medicine is how we have survived centuries of genocide and exploitation by the global north. All the strength and solidarity to our Quechua and Aymaras brothers in different locations, resistance against this struggle. Next slide, please. We also participated in fairs with other ministries, the Day of Mother Earth, that was promoted by Bolivia throughout the world, that we celebrate on April 22, the National Day Against Racism and any form of discrimination, because in addition to social injustice that we recognize and suffer, we still have to consider the epistemic injustice. We need to consider climate injustice. The south of the world is condemned to suffer climate change due to the greed of the north. So we remember on the Environmental Day, World Day, we take care of the water sources and the adequate nutrition and safe nutrition for the people. Our ancestral medicine is part of our life. We do ancestral ceremonies that have to do with ancestral spirituality on the way how we live with our sacred places and territory. And our Intersectorial Andean Roundtable for Coordination Against Inequality is an important effort done by the Andean Health Organization so that Ministry of Health have guidance and guidelines to overcome this painful gap that only who has money has access to health. That has to end. The Alma Ata, the statement of Declaration of called Health for All in the year 2000. This is 2023 and we haven't achieved that goal that was a commitment from the countries. We need to continue to fight of health as a human right. And together we are stronger. Dr. Salvador Allende in Chile has taught us that the history is ours, done by the peoples, and Dr. Ernesto Guevara in Bolivia taught us that the first disease that we need to eradicate is social injustice. And a very important teaching that you can always search in fight against any injustice, against anyone in any part of the world. This is what a revolutionary does. And from here, we do work like this because we love life and our people, and we are committed to overcome as a big challenge such as social injustice. Thank you very much and greetings from Bolivia.
Muchas gracias, querida Vivian, por esas ideas tan
Vivian, for
importantes,
those
la
interesting
reiteración
ideas
de que la salud es un derecho
that
humano
health is a
fundamental en su toda
fundamental
mercancía,
human right
que
and not a
trabajamos para
merchandise,
crear
that
diversas
we
injusticias
work to
sociales y
overcome
globales, incluida
inequalities,
injusticia epistémica,
including
que
the
tiene que ver
systemic
con el menosprecio
inequality that has to
que
do with the
todavía
rejection
desafortunadamente
that
mantiene
unfortunately is
por
still
los principios
predominant
ancestrales y la
to
medicina
ancestral knowledge
tradicional.
and traditional
Resaltar el
medicine.
aporte del equipo de
Highlight
Bolivia, mis
the
países,
contribution of
que
Bolivia in the
sigue haciendo un llamado
intersectorial
a la
roundtable,
coherencia en todo
calling
lo que
to
necesita
coherence
revalorar y rescatar la
in
tradición
valuing and
médica de
rescuing
varios países
traditional
ancestrais.
medicine.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you
Vamos
very
a
much.
continuar en sala.
And now,
A
please
continuación,
stay in the room.
damos la
Now,
palabra
we
a
would like to
Odette
welcome Odette
Urrutia. Ella es
Urrutia.
coordinadora
She is
del
the
Departamento
coordinator
de
of the Department
Políticas
of
de
National Health
Salud del
Strategy
Ministerio de
and the
Salud.
Ministry of Health
Adelante,
of
querida
Chile.
Odette.
Go ahead, dear Odette.
Hola, muy buenas tardes a
Good
todos
afternoon
los que nos
to
están
everyone
mirando en
who
este
are
momento.
following
Gracias por la
us.
invitación
Thanks for the
y también
invitation
poder
and
compartir las
also
distintas
share
experiencias
the
de
different
los distintos
experiences
países que componemos
of the
este
countries
grupo
that make up
de intersectorial
this
contra las desigualdades.
intersectorial and then
Desde
roundtable
Chile,
against
básicamente la experiencia
inequalities.
que queremos
From Chile, the
compartir
experience that we would
tiene
like to
relación
share
con
is
un proceso de
related
planificación
to a
sanitaria que
planning,
desarrollamos
sanitary
década tras
planning
década.
in Chile that we
Actualmente nos
consider
encontramos
decade after decade. We are
en la
currently
década ya
in
2021-2030.
the 2021
Iniciamos un
2030
proceso
decade. We started
de
a process
planificación sanitaria
of health
en la cual
sanitary planning
como departamento dentro de la división de
as,
planificación
as a
sanitaria
department in the
nos
Office of
basamos en
Sanitary
los
Planning.
aprendizajes que
We
históricamente
base
se
on
tienen
the
respecto a lo que es la planificación
experience of Chile in
sanitaria
terms of
y
health
también
planning,
empleamos
and also we
instrumentos
use
internacionales
all the
de
international
desarrollo.
frames
¿Ya?
that
Es
deal
así
with
como
this. That is
utilizamos
why
todos los
we
elementos
use all
contenidos
the
dentro de
elements
los
that
objetivos
are
de desarrollo
considered in
sostenible,
the
como
SDG,
lo que se plantea
well
en
as
el
what
plan
is proposed
estratégico
through
de la
the
OMS,
strategic plan from
donde
PAHO,
su declaración es
where the
explícita, ¿ya?
explicit
La equidad es el
declaration
corazón de la
that
salud
equity is
y así es
the
como
heart of health,
también desde el país
and
hemos considerado
from
la
our country we have
necesidad y la
considered the need
importancia
to approach it,
del marco metodológico que
the
nosotros
methodological
utilizamos para poder
framework that we use
construir esta estrategia
to
nacional de
build
salud.
this national health strategy.
Tiene muchos componentes
As
que
many
efectivamente
components
quisiera
that
resaltar es
what we
el
basically
tema
like to highlight
de
is
la participación que
balance
tiene que haber a nivel
of the
territorial,
participation that
tanto a
has to
nivel
be at the
local como a
territorial
nivel
level, both at the central
nacional,
level as well as the
y
regional
también
level,
del intersector y
the
la participación de
participation
las
of the
sociedades civiles,
intersector
y
and the civil
focalizamos
society,
también
and
nuestros
how
esfuerzos en
we
aquellos grupos y
do the
poblaciones que están en mayor
focus
necesidad.
our effort,
Y como todo esto nos
and
lleva
how
o
all of
nos
these leads us,
permite
takes us and
avanzar
allows us to
hacia
move
una
ahead
mejor salud,
towards the
accesibilidad y
health
equidad,
rights,
con el fuerte
universality,
objetivo
and
de
equity
alcanzar y de
in
apoyar
order to
a un
achieve
desarrollo sostenible.
contribute for sustainable
La Estrategia
development.
Nacional de Salud en
The
sí es un
National Health
instrumento de
Strategy
planificación
is a planning
que se
instrument
construye para
that
poder
is built
alcanzar y
so
avanzar
we
hacia
can
los
reach
objetivos
and go
sanitarios
towards the
a lo largo de
health
la década.
objective
Para esta década en
proposed for this
particular
decade.
se han
And for this
propuesto
decade in
cuatro objetivos
particular, we
sanitarios.
have
El
4
primero
health
está asociado
objectives.
a
The first one is
el
started
cuidado
to
y
improve
bienestar de la
health
población.
and well-being of the
El
population.
segundo
The second one is something
va a continuar lo más probable por muchas
that will
décadas porque es
continue
un
for many
esfuerzo
decades
constante que hay que ir
because this
realizando
need
y
requires
tiene
a
que ver con
constant
disminuir
effort
las
that has to do
desigualdades
with
a nivel
decreasing
local. El tercer
inequities in
objetivo
health.
sanitario es
The third
asegurar la
health
calidad de la
objective
atención
is
en
to
salud. El
assure the
cuarto es
quality
avanzar hacia
of
la construcción
healthcare.
de
And number
comunidades
4 is to move
saludables
towards the
con una
construction
mirada mucho más
of
equitativa
communities,
y segura.
healthy communities and
Solamente
environment
un poco
that
romper este modelo
trying to
que
break
como les
this
decía
model
al inicio,
that
Odette,
the,
en
could be mentioned in terms of working individual level and forgetting that we are living in an environment and a space. This planning model is made up of 7 strategic axes. Each one of these axes in itself has topics in terms of health and also in version of the strategy. We have proposed transversal cross components, the equity, comprehensive health. The third component is a life course perspective, and number 4 is intersectoriality. So by having these transversal components is that they can approach each one of the topics in these 7 axes and add them to the definitions and of those key interventions that are required to move towards greater social justice. The topics in particular in the strategy, such as indigenous people's health, health of migrants, they're topics that perhaps of their epidemiological magnitude do not seem to be relevant, such as the autism spectrum or diseases that now are very frequent, but these were topics that were indicated by the citizens, and in that regard, we believe that in this version, we're also contributing towards that, the social justice. What are we developing to strengthen the or reinforce the equity component in this strategic planning? Well, on one hand, we have the technical cooperation from PAHO. We are drafting, and it's a final draft, the National Health Strategy Equity Plan has several components. One of them is that of professional training who work in the sector. We also will be monitoring of inequalities. Chile has an experience in the last decade with the previous strategy with regards to this topic, and it's important to maintain this and also taking actions and measure how reducing these inequalities and potent intersectorial work that requires a baseline diagnosis and then take action. And at the short and midterm, start strengthening the redesign of programs with health social determinants components. The third topic is the reactivation of the Equity and Health in All Policies Commission, both at the national level and at the regional level, and of course, the active participation in the Andean Intersectorial Roundtable for Coordination Against Health Inequality. We know that the challenges are many, and progress that reflects the learnings that we have collected from previous decades, but we clearly need to continue improving and building towards the contribution that we can provide from this planning tool to have a more fair, with more equity. Thank you very much. Thank you, dear Odette, for your presentation. Thank you for showing the national strategy for the health objective, for the active participation and leadership in the intersectorial Andean Roundtable. The Chile's contribution is always focused in the intersectorial approach and also in maintaining the SDGs objectives. I would like to remind you about the resolution of the Ministry of Health of the 6 Andean countries that requires to ask a regional monitoring system with emphasis in social inequality reductions in terms of health, and especially the incidence in public policies to achieve the goals to guarantee healthy life and to promote well-being for everyone at all ages. Thank you very much. Now, we invite Andrea Rodriguez, coordinator of the Knowledge Management and Information Source Group from the Ministry of Health and Social Protection from Colombia. Thank you. We cannot hear you, Andrea. Your audio is breaking up.
¿Acá me escuchan? Sí, ahí le escucho. Adelante, por favor.
Yes, we can hear you.
No se escucha, Andrea.
We cannot hear you, Andrea.
Por favor, compártela.
Can you share your presentation, please? We're having some technical difficulties with her audio. Sorry.
Más allá de promedio. Que se valoran en la sociedad.
T'en connais tous les deux, vous traduisez très bien. Hein.
¿Acá se ve? ¿No? Andrea, desafortunadamente no estamos escuchando bien. Si por favor puedes solucionar el tema del micrófono, hacerte más cerca, hablar más duro, por
We
favor.
cannot hear you, unfortunately. Could you please get,
¿Me escuchan mejor?
can you hear me better?
Por favor.
I'm going to
Sí, por favor.
close
Estamos bien.
my video.
Bien, muchas gracias. Entonces les decía,
I was saying that this is National Observatory.
que tiene como antecedente dar un espacio.
We want to generate sorry, we're having technical issues with her audio.
Los datos en el país, la información cuantitativa es una información que tradicionalmente ha cuantificado la enfermedad.
Has traditionally quantified disease and has quantified obtaining averages. However, 2 or 3 governments ago, we start to rethink, to identify from those data and identify those inequalities with the help of several institutions to have information that will shorten those gaps and will allow us to be input from those analysis input for public policy. Health is a right in our country. And in this logic, we have some remote areas in the country where there's inequality. And this observatory has allowed us to identify the specific goals are to estimate health social inequalities of those following those defined by PAHO, analyze social inequalities and provide strategic evidence on social inequalities to evaluate policies to consolidate and spread and contribute to social translation of knowledge and measure those inequalities and those limitations allows a feedback to identify these gaps. But in addition, we also work to raise the level that will allow us to understand what's going on following the quantitative information. This has been a space where we work with the population and those who are migrants. What's the mission of this observatory? To lead in the generation of knowledge with the key stakeholders. Today, the country has an intersectorial mission of public health, and in following the reform for the health system, there's a commission to determine health social determinants led by our president, so this information can be put into scene and be used for decision making all the ministers. The vision for 2030 to be recognized as a reference scenario locally and internationally and to have good quality information with the coordination with stakeholders and the incidence in public policies to reduce social inequalities in Colombia. These are the values that we have in our observatory. This is the model of knowledge management, from the preparation of data, the dissemination of information, the transformation of that information into analysis that allow us to identify the gaps, the translation of knowledge through newsletters and analysis documents that allow us to communicate the situation of health and this input with the knowledge. And from there, we've worked with this conceptual framework of social determinants and inequalities in health. And the ones in red are the ones that need to be updated and should be potentiated, recognizing the socio-political conflict, the environment, and the inequalities in the power relationship, racism, territory for social historical construction, migration status, conflict victims, and to some extent, those regimes of affiliation to health systems that are determined by payment capacity in the course of life as a continuous process of care of people and the recognition of people and the process of social mobilization, something that they are working with PAHO in order to potentiate this theoretical framework that will allow us to potentiate our analysis. These are the working lines for analysis. And then our certification, we can look at actions at every level. So we have some indicators which are tracers, time series that allow us to look at those gaps, and some 10-year time frame at the regional and national level. These are some proposals to calculate the metrics of inequality, the multi-level and geospatial analysis. Among the outputs, we have the microsite of the observatory. There's a technical document about guidelines, how to set up those observatories, the articles, the newsletters, graphic material in order to provide input. So the policy analysis and the evaluation of them. Just to mention in knowledge network, a picture in a meeting at Horas and our strategic partners. Thank you very much. Thank you, dear Andrea, for your excellent presentation. And we would like to indicate that this observatory process for equity in the Ministry of Colombia is a referral for the work that we're doing in our roundtable, because we have a proposal to organize a regional observatory, and for that regional observatory, with emphasis in reducing inequalities, we consider to have a baseline and the adequate measurement. We need that each country has its own observatory. Thank you very much. We will continue with the delegate from the Ministry of Health from Ecuador, Isabel Clavijo Ulrich. She's a specialist of coordination of actors in space for social participation in health. Go ahead, Isabel. Thank you, Berta. Can you help me with the presentation? Well, I work in the citizens' participation in health. This is a very important topic because in the Ecuador's constitution, we urge institutions to incorporate citizens' participation. Can you help me with the presentation, Berta, please? I will just move ahead because of time. We see that the direct intervention of citizens is a process that affects their lives. the economic, the social, the cultural, the political environment. And in this appropriation, we started in the 40s with the community growth. Remember that this was directed to so the third world or underdeveloped countries, as they used to call them before. And this will improve their living conditions without going through a public policy that will allow them access. In health, social actors identify problems, define priorities, and formulate proposals and solutions for personal, family, and community health care. Pajo in 1994 defined social participation in health as the action of social actors with the capacity, ability, and opportunity to identify problems, needs, define priorities, and formulate and negotiate their proposals in the perspective of health development. Participation comprises the collective actions through which the population faces challenges of reality, identifies and analyzes its problems, formulates and negotiates proposals, and satisfies health needs in a deliberate, democratic, and concerted manner.
Isabel, perdón, recuerda que nos están haciendo interpretación simultánea.
Isabel, there's a simultaneous interpretation into English and into French, so please slow down. In this regards, but to go to the reality of our country, specifically Ecuador, implies to work with many peoples and nationalities. The country had 18 nationalities, had 14 languages, and two peoples in voluntary isolation. And this implies to work with this diversity so we can build equity in health. From Alma Ata in 1978, community and social participation has been a major strategy for achieving the goal of health for all by the year 2000. Part of this strategy, the community participation, was identified as the key to making health services available to the entire population, particularly to the most at-risk groups with the least access to services. Then, in the Ottawa Declaration, one of the items of the cycle that we see in the slide speaks about strengthening community action, fundamental access to reach objectives in health promotion. In Ecuador, following our recent constitution of 2008, that health is universal and free for everyone. There's a model of comprehensive care that's called MICE that is focused to a set of strategies to approach the health of Ecuador. That is why in the renewed PHC is strongly linked to process of social organization and participation. The generation of deliberative and associative democratic spaces of citizen power can become in the short and medium term the opportunity to generate transformation process in the field of health and quality of life. In this process, the Ministry of Health has generated several spaces of participation, social participation in health. We have local health communities that in 1970, we have these communities linked to each care system throughout the country. To slides more, please. There are 140 district committees of health. Next slide. And zone committees that work in joint planning The next slide. With the units or districts of health to generate plans that help to work on health determinants and to improve the health of the population. We also have other mechanisms of participation, which are observatories, oversight, user committees, and accountability processes. All these instances make up the strategy for citizen participation in health and constitute democratic, deliberative, and associative spaces of power. Instances will become in the short and medium term the opportunity to generate information processes in the field of health. Why do we say at some point? Because we are still in the process and we're finding difficulties in the process. In terms of citizens, there's a lack of interest, lack of empowerment due to time, because most of them have a job and they don't make it on time to the meeting. There is a lack of recognition of their actions by the community, the local authorities, and even from the health personnel. So they are not recognized as important in their participation for health. People who do this are considered to be that they have extra time or they get some economic benefit. And this is always a volunteer participation, the lack of knowledge of the legal framework in the area of participation. So we consider this favor from both sides. So this is a favor that the citizens participate. It's a favor that the ministry gives the citizens this participation space. And in the terms professionals, our training is extremely biomedical. So to work in health promotion is still difficult. It's more in terms of cares of biomedicine, which is more vertical. Take these drugs, do this test. It's not a dialogue of how to improve and work in the area of health. And for the professional, there's a lack of knowledge of regulations in terms of participation. And there's no application of the access of participations has to be present for the intercultural and rights. However, this is something that we are doing in every corner of the country with difficult, what I mentioned before, of languages, nationalities, recognition of popular wisdom, the knowledge of ancestral science and other topics. A brief review of what we are working in citizen participation in the Ministry of Public Health. Thank you very much. Thank you, Isabel. Opportunity to thank the Ecuador team for their participation in this tutorial Andean Roundtable in terms of participation as a human right, as a right to exercise power and incidence in the decision, political decision. So in the intersectorial roundtable, we need to incorporate most of the voices, and the drafting of the Andean Roundtable to reduce inequality, one of the resolutions approved by the ministries, if the Andean Health proposes us to use an intersectorial process for sharing with all the countries of the community. Now we will hear from to the team a message from to the team of Peru, Federico Arnillas, president of the Roundtable to Fight Against Poverty. And this is the experience of many years of effort, was the inspiration to make up the intersectorial and the Roundtable for coordination against inequalities in the Andean regions. Go ahead, dear Federico. Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. I hope it works. to use my few minutes that we have. The first idea, having problems using the full screen here.
No se ve completa.
Ok, quisiera insistir en esta idea
I
de
would like to insist the idea of a dignified life for everyone. As a country, we are committed, and the roundtable is the expression of that commitment. The roundtable was created in 2001 in a context of political crisis, and as a result of the cooperation between state and civil society, it was created as a mechanism that was recognized by a law that joins state and social and civil society. I always say that a relationship of two has problems, so they need someone else to help to have a good relation. So the role from the technical team of the round table is to facilitate dialogue. The concepts that we think are key: dialogue, negotiation, and consultation. Dialogue, the idea of dialogue is to an understanding. We respect, we have different points of view, but we understand your point of view. The idea of negotiation is a play of win and lose. What you win, the other one lose, and that is very well accepted in some margins, but it's always a point of conflict outside of margins, that you always think that maybe I could have win more or lose less. So there's always that aftertaste that we don't like. And the consultation is a win-win game. And this is in that we need, this is the idea of the relationship between state and society, by having common goals and work to achieve them. So the well-being grows for everyone. The representation on the round table includes several instances of the national and regional governments, and also a plural representation of civil society. We have the entrepreneurs, workers, women's organization, religion organizations, international cooperation is also present. And the structure includes a national roundtable and roundtables in all the regions. The approach is on comprehensive human development. You understand that's something that we aspire to get, but to get there, it requires cooperation between the stakeholders. And this is a task that we need to start in the short term, although the results require of longer time frames. This is a process can lead us to a situation where there's inequalities or different situations towards to a situation of greater well-being. It's not that has a linear trajectory, it has ups and downs, and you need to be aware of that in order to try to optimize the process and reduce the fall. The vision in social has we have four dimensions: social, economic, political, and environmental and territorial. It's important to point out that these four dimensions is the same used by the Peruvian state for the election process. So the polit political parties must present their government plans under those four dimensions. We will see the relevance later on. So we're trying to develop human capacities, protecting infancy as considered as a priority. We have economic development with dignified work, with rights, to have an development not only focused on national government, but also decentralized with participation and a sustained environmental management.
Federico, perdón, un poquito más.
Federico, you need to go slow.
Por favor. Gracias.
Este es un tema clave en un país
This
tan
is something important for a country so diverse as Peru. It is also important to link poverty and inequality. From our perspective, poverty is in first place an ethical problem, but it is also linked to inequality because poverty reproduces in the loss of opportunity, exclusion of opportunities for a full development, and the causes of poverty are associated to multiple factors that determine their existence and their survival in time. Something like that was mentioned by the initial presentation professor. How do we measure poverty in Peru? All the measurements are limited. What we're using in this roundtable, we have three approximations and join them in one together and satisfy basic needs, monetary poverty, and the measurement of apparent caloric deficit. I would like to point out I'm not including the graphs of the trends that we've seen in recent years about these indicators, but I will quickly mention from 2004 to 2016. The roundtable was created in 2001, and we took all these three indicators show a slope in reduction of the population affected by these factors, but that changes in 2016, where we start a process of political crisis that is still current in the country and proposes additional challenges. How does the roundtable operate? There are four important processes: the consultation of proposals, the follow-up of what has been consulted. This consultation is done jointly between the state and civil society, and the follow-up is the same. The numbers are discussed, and we look for learnings and lessons. And there are also actions for capacity development and participation promotion, with consultation process at different scales and differentiated consultations from the different sectors of the population. For example, children or the elderly, the youth, the voices from different regions. Those consultations reach almost all the districts in the country except two. There's always a place in the table. Come, we need you. But how do we understand this problem? What is a baseline diagnosis? Our baseline diagnosis is this contradiction between the public offer and supply, demand and supply, that doesn't guarantee the care of the rights of the people. The question is, do we have behind? What reproduces this gap? And what we mentioned is that the key factor is how from the state they allocate resources, in the sense that the budget doesn't contribute to the efficacy and quality of public expenditure because it is not responding to this approach of right, and the planning that is used is not guaranteeing that those resources are adequately used and get to those who need. And that has some effects that the public expenditure is insufficient with inequity and is not occasion. We need to consider that public expenditure is maintained with the tax collection system, and if this is not, there's inequity in this taxation system, this will get things worse. Now we were moving through different stages. The first one that had to do with institutionalization that led us to improve the transparency tools and to participative budget and to priorities at the second stage, the universal services, to have expenditure classifiers to see who's spending money and where, and there's a physical goals and territorial goals that were built. From this element, are considered to build and to propose in relation to the political parties in the context of electoral processes, the formulation of governability agreements. We just have elected regional and local authorities, and what I'm showing the screen are those agreements that are in each one of the regions from the country. This can be downloaded, and the idea is that the agreement be as wide as possible. But sometimes the agreement could be just a little bit. If there's at least one point of agreement, that would be our starting point to build the other agreements. The follow-up of governability agreements is a consultative follow-up because the state and the society stakeholders participate in that process. That teaches us to how to dialogue and then to do consultation, and we find better ways to offer the services that are required to guarantee rights. So the contribution of the consultative follow-up is a contribution to public management. There's a learning process, but there's also a contribution to improve the service, and we can identify mistakes and others. In the last election process, we had governability agreements in the 26 regions of the country, and then we have provincial and district agreements. This is the graph of the agreements, and this is the vision of the health that were prioritized in the governability agreements. Some of them are specific, such as malnutrition, anemia, those related to maternal mortality, neonatal mortality. There are agreements that have to do with life stages of the population or some situations of diseases that are present in different territories, and some preventive measures such as vaccination, food security, water sanitation, fight against violence, or topics that at the beginning of the process were key, such as the access to the national ID document, which is a key document of in the context of the pandemic, had gaps, and we are trying to overcome. And we also have the family agriculture topics. So the idea is to define a set of goals that, according to the territories, can allow us to move ahead in the care of demands from the population. This is the general approach that we want to share with you, and we're ready to respond to any question. The balance of the experience has been exported, and we thank the ORAS platform for helping us to pour this part of the experience, and to thank what the other countries of the region have taught us and are also being developed to improve our own process. Just a final comment of the presentation of Professor today. I would like to, this is the issue. The difference between difference quality. My comment is the following. One element that we're especially aware is the singularity character of each one. All human beings are equal in dignity and therefore equal in rights, but we are unique beings, and that proposes several issues, because one that we are trying to do is to get close to those who seem to be more equal than us. It's the mirror complex. I'm looking little mirrors where I see myself,
a generar en ese sentido
and to
una cierta
generate
gregariedad con esos con los
some
que
separation
me siento
with those who,
mejor.
or get closer to those who I feel better or see,
Entiendo a aquellos otros
and I'm
que quizá
differentiating others
los veo distintos,
who I see them
los
different,
diferencio y me distancio.
and I put some distance.
Creo que ahí hay mecanismos psicológicos
I
que hay
think
que
that there are
trabajar,
some
y uno de ellos
psychological mechanisms that we need to work upon,
reconociendo
and this is
las
to
diferencias
recognize
y la singularidad
the
de las
differences and
personas,
singularity of people,
asegurar que el concepto de
make sure
desigualdad
that the
se mueve
concept
en
of
otro plano,
inequality moves in a
¿no? El
different plane,
concepto de
and the
desigualdad
concept of
va estrechamente
inequality is
vinculado
closely linked
al concepto de
to the concept
reproducción de las
of
desigualdades,
reproduction of the
y que si bien
inequalities,
estas
and that
desigualdades
although
al
these
principio
inequalities
parecen
at the
pequeñas
beginning
y no
seem to be
significativas,
small and not
uno de los problemas que
insignificant,
estamos teniendo
another
es
problem that
que
we are
estamos
facing is that
generando
we are
un
generating
conjunto de desigualdades por
a
las
set
formas
of
como se establecen las
inequalities,
relaciones
other
humanas, las
why
relaciones
human
económicas,
relationships
las
are
relaciones
established in terms of
culturales,
production
etcétera,
of culture,
que nos ha
etc.,
llevado a
that
escenarios de
have led us
polarización.
to
Hemos
polarization
tenido la
scenarios.
diferencia
We
en
have made the
desigualdad
difference
y
in
las
inequality,
desigualdades las
and the
hemos reducido
inequalities
a escala
are
ampliada para
reproduced and
convertirlas
are
finalmente,
increased,
¿no?, en
and
bloques de
they
interés contrapuestos. Y creo que lo más
result
valioso
in
que tenemos
interest
hoy
blocks
día
that are
es que
fighting against
estamos
each
comiendo
other.
el planeta,
And I think we are
estamos
eating our
poniendo el
planet.
planeta
We
al
are putting
borde
the
de la
planet on
muerte,
the
¿no? Y
brink of
eso
death,
va de la mano con un
and that
cambio
goes
en un
together
aspecto que ha sido
with a
fundamental
change
para
of
la
a
especie humana.
fundamental element
Hemos
for human
dejado de
species.
cooperar
We are
para pasar a
stopping
una lógica de
cooperating
confrontar.
of
En esa
confrontation
lógica de
instead of
confrontación,
cooperation, and in that
la
logic,
escala de las
the
armas
scale
que
of
nos ha
the
puesto a la
weapons
sociedad
that the
contemporánea, la
contemporary
escala de humanas
society
de la
has, the human
contemporánea,
species,
¿no?, pueden significar el fin de la
can
especie.
significant the
Creo
end
que
of the
estamos
species. And I
obligados
think that we
no
are
solamente
forced
a defender la
not only
salud,
to
sino
defend
lo que
health,
ella porta, la vida.
but what should
Y ese es
protect,
nuestro
which is life,
desafío,
and that
defender
is
la
our
vida,
challenge to
¿no?,
defend
de
life
todos los seres humanos
of
en el
all
planeta.
human
Pero
beings
no
in the
podemos
planet.
defender la
But we
vida de los
cannot
seres humanos
defend
en el
life of the
planeta
human
si
beings
no
in the planet
defendemos todas
if
las
we don't
formas de
defend
vida
all
que
the
hay en
ways
el
of life
planeta.
that we have
Y
in
ese
it.
es nuestro reto.
And that is our
¿Cómo
challenge.
recuperamos lo que
How do
como
we
especie
recover
nos hemos
what we as a
perdido,
species
hemos
have taken
destruido,
and
hemos
destroyed,
quemado, hemos
have burned,
contaminado
and have
y que hoy
polluted,
día también se nos
and that
presenta,
today
¿no?
we are facing that?
Solo habrá paz
We
si
will only have
recuperamos
peace.
esa relación
We
con
recover
la
that
naturaleza,
relationship with nature,
con los otros seres humanos
with
distintos
other
pero
human
iguales
beings
a
that are
nosotros,
different but equal
iguales
to
en
us,
derechos, que hay que
equal in
garantizar.
right.
Ese es nuestro desafío
That is
como
our
especie. Muchas
challenge.
gracias por la
Thank you
oportunidad.
very much
Muchas
for the
gracias,
opportunity.
querido Federico, por la
Thank you, dear
presentación de la
Federico,
experiencia de
for your
esta
presentation
asociación
of the experience of
de la
the round
población en
table
Perú.
in Peru
Hemos retomado
that
como
we have
lección
taken,
aprendida, como
the
resumen
lessons
de
learned,
toda esa experiencia y las
all
recomendaciones que
the
tienen
experience and
en la mesa
recommendations that you have
intersectorial de
in the
concertación contra las desigualdades.
intersectorial and the
La educación
roundtable for
y
coordination against
participación siempre
inequality.
muy activa
Thank
en
you
el
very much to the
exterior, en
team
el
of
liderazgo
Peru
que ahora
and the
están
leadership
asumiendo como
that
presidencia por
they
primera
are
vez.
having as pro tempore
También
presidency,
por incluir el concepto,
and
estamos
also for
conmemorando hoy
including,
el
we're
Día Mundial de la
celebrating today
Justicia Social,
the
y
day of
donde siempre en el
social
orar
justice.
reiteramos las ideas y
Horas
principios
we always
fundamentales de la
reiterate
justicia
the
ambiental.
principles
Muchas
of
gracias.
environmental.
Ahora vamos a darle la palabra a
Now,
Carlos Ayestas Portugal,
Carlos Ayestas,
director
Portugal,
ejecutivo de la Dirección de
Executive Director
Aseguramiento de
of
Salud
the Office
y
of Health
Bienestar
in
de Perú.
Assurance and the Means of
Bienvenido,
Health of
Carlos.
Peru. Go ahead, dear
Buenas
Carlos.
tardes con todos y con
Good
todas. Muchísimas
afternoon,
gracias
everyone.
por
Thank
esta
you very
invitación.
much
Gustoso de
for the
poder
invitation.
participar.
It's
Agradecer
a
al
pleasure to
organismo
participate
andino
and
de
to
salud,
thank
ahora
the Ambient
y a
Health
los
Organization
organizadores en sí.
and the
Eh,
organizers.
bueno, mi nombre es Carlos Ayesta Portugal,
My
soy
name is
especialista
Carlos
en
Ayesta,
gestiones
Portugal.
de
I'm a
salud
specialist
preventiva.
in health management.
Dificultad con el cargo. Hacerles presente también el saludo del doctor
Also,
Carlos Alvarado Chico,
Dr.
director
Carlos
general
Alvarado Chico is the
de
General Director
Relacionamiento e Intercambio Presidencial.
of
El
this
tema por el cual nos han invitado a
Health
convocar es para
Quality Assurance.
algunos
and I will present some progress made in terms of universal coverage of health in Peru. This was officially issued in 2009, has been able to achieve the contributions and to have impact in health indicators in the effort to provide financial protection in the population that is mostly affected and perhaps unprotected. When we talk about universal coverage, we always remember this cube with universal coverage of health. This cube shows us three dimensions: population coverage, how are we going to identify this coverage towards services that we're going to provide, in what facilities and what type of coverage, and the financial coverage that talks about financing other resources, how administer and how so the health establishment can take care of the population. So universal coverage was the model of policy which Peru wanted to get universal coverage. In terms of population coverage, today 98.8% of the population in Peru is affiliated to some type of insurance, either private or public. In this curve to the right, we see that we see a plateau since 2015 to 2018. However, between 2019, 20, and 21, there was a substantial increase in affiliation and coverage for the population, and also went through a critical moment in the world with the pandemic. And this was a level regulatory document with urgency decrease, where we established SIS that affiliate the entire population regardless of the socioeconomic conditions. And this, we will determine if they stay in this comprehensive health system or we identify through another mechanism in a different plan. So through these mechanisms, the population will have coverage, at least during these public as well as private insurances. Regarding the benefits that we offer that are provided to the population, the most important element is the essential plan for health coverage, will tell us what are going to be the conditions, the diagnosis, the procedures that are going to be offered to the population. In regards to the previous version, this plan was updated in 2021, could cover up to 81.3% of the total burden of diseases, with early death and disability. Up to 81.3% of this disease burden have been added to this essential plan for health insurance, and goes from 140 to 162 conditions, 1,691 diagnoses CIE-10, and it's include with promotion and prevention of health interventions. Although the need of the population is to care for them, but we also need to think on how can we approach those problems that are making that the population be more vulnerable or ill, with promoting health that talks about this determinant and lifestyles is extremely important. We also have 1,384 medical procedures. With regards to financial coverage, the analysis was seen in terms of financing, think how to improve collection of resources, fiscal space, improve some taxes, and the second dimension for financing with regard administration. The several we are reconfiguration of the systems with in terms of financing. One of the models that we are working, or proposal of models, is to have one single public fund, a proposal preliminary, but this fund may be considering the most important insurance at the national levels, and there's some looking to improve and achieve this. A fund that may cover the entire population, universal coverage, and also what they call reinsurance. It's not exactly like that, but would be a coverage compensating the high risk that may some populations can have, especially associated to high cost technologies. We've seen the experience in other countries in Latin America, like Colombia and Chile, which they are showing their experience and a road that they are showing us how can we improve based on their experiences. And in terms of the third element, how this pays the lender, how do you pay the provider and condition the behavior of the provider. In this case, we have some devices, the payment mechanism, and an adequate costing. It should be clear in terms what's the cost of a service offered to the population, and that is how we should organize the budget. In terms of coverage, the budget are allocated to Peru in 2007 to 2023, 2,000 millions to 12,000, $12 billion. Health, significant increase, but we see the orange graph where it shows that the increase in terms of percentage of how much is this represents to the budget, national budget, the increase is almost between 2 percentage points, which is not a substantial increase. We talk of how much we got in health in terms of the total, but in absolute terms, it's quite large. In regards to the comprehensive health care, the most important insurer in Peru started 2.5 billion, and here we see that the percentage of the sector that goes to SIS has a significant increase from almost 10% at the beginning up to 20%. So the financing to this public insurer has also been substantial, both in absolute terms as well as percentage terms. Another surprising finding in the allocation of primary healthcare, although there's no study that can identify how much is going to primary healthcare. In the budget, there are some classifiers that allow us some idea. These are proxy indicators, a comparison between the money that goes to basic medical care versus specialized medical care. In 2009 to 2023, more budget is allocated to basic medical care, except for 3 key years, 2019, 2020, and 2021, in 4 years. It was precisely the years where we suffered this COVID-19 pandemic, where the budget under the political strategy established in Peru to respond to the pandemic was focused towards specialized care in hospitals. So we can see this differentiation. In terms of challenges, it's the distribution of the first level facilities, health posts, and the second and third level, which are the hospitals and specialized hospitals, compared by quintiles of poverty. Quintile 1, the lowest, and 5 quintile, the largest income. And we found that the lower level or first level facilities are in the districts of the lowest quintiles, while the most specialized facilities are available in the districts with the highest quintiles. That lead us to reflect and think that the mechanism that guarantee that this population that has first level care can get the guarantee that they can come to these facilities that are in a more affordable or more worth quintals that have more wealth. With regards to the private sector, the supply is focused in the quintals 3, 4, and 5, almost absent of private facilities in the lowest quintiles. This according to official data from the government institution. But not only the supply, and there's also the demand. In 9 provinces, have almost 50% of the populations. These are provinces where the needs, the epidemiological behavior is quite similar, and they have coincides with these districts of the highest quintiles. So these are scale economies, market economies where the population can choose. While on the other 187 provinces, where the other 50% of the population, they are scattered, the health needs are not the same, there's not supply of services. So this represents another challenge to cover the needs. Strategy that a comprehensive health networks, portability. There are many ideas being developed that inherited from many years of a more focalized effort without taking into consideration these inequalities that now are part of the challenges that we face in the Ministry of Health. Finally, this initial cube that has 3 dimensions should not behave like that. This is not a fixed cube. It has to be dynamic and it has to come alive. And the circumstances and conditions change. The plan that we have today cannot be the same with the population or coverage for tomorrow. The pandemic has showed that the systems will respond in a dynamic fashion. They have to become alive because it is precisely that we have to protect life. So to change from a coverage of a 3-dimension cube to a 4-dimension cube being the 4th-dimension time dynamics to make this care effective. The conditions that impact health, social determinants that have been discussed. And another challenge is governance in health that involves everyone. Nihil de nobis sine nobis. We're making decisions on the population for the population. Let's hear them. They need to participate because beyond a realistic sense, be clearer in how to approach it, provides legitimacy to express and show a population that we are working for them. These governance spaces will also be strengthening in 5 dimensions, transparency, accountability, capacity. And this is what I wanted to share with all of you. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. And I apologize for taking too much time.
Gracias, estimado Carlos.
Thank you, Carlos. Patricia Diaz,
Delegada por el ministro,
delegate from by the Ministry of Health.
es especialista en
She's
cursos
a
de
specialist in
liderazgo.
life
Nos
course.
pidió que usted
She
hiciera esta presentación
asked
también
me to
por
make
las
this
reflexiones y los
presentation
desafíos que hemos
because of the
realizado en nuestra
challenges and
conferencia
insights
alrededor de lograr
regarding
sistemas de salud
giving
universales
universal
que
health systems
garanticen
that
el derecho a
guarantee
la salud
the
de
right
toda la población de
health of
nuestro
the
país.
entire population.
Muchas gracias, muy amable.
Thank you
Vamos a
very
pasar
much.
ya a un momento muy importante.
Now we're going to go to an important moment, which is the dialogue. I ask everyone to please start your videos. We thank everyone that are joining us from the Ministry of Health, academic areas, social organizations, several entities from Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Venezuela. There are many people joining us from Argentina, Belize, Bolivia. As I mentioned, we also have, of course, France, Guatemala, England, Mexico, Nicaragua, Paraguay, Uruguay, England, among many others. We have many questions and comments during the development of this webinar. And we would like to thank Professor Francois Dumais that stayed until the end. Could you please make some comments in relation to the experiences that you heard and what we've presented you from the Andean countries? And also, I would like to take the opportunity to give you an initial question. How do you interpret what happened during the pandemic in Latin America in relation to pre-existent inequality? If you consider that this is evidence of a lack of social states that redistribute resources to have a right of health and to life with social justice.
Bien, je vous remercie. Je suis parfaitement incompétent dans tous ces problèmes de santé. Je voudrais d'abord répondre à Federico
I
Arnias.
would like to respond to Federico Arnillas. Tell him that the problem of solidarity implies that we have something in common with people to which we are going to make a sacrifice, since solidarity implies that we do things for people that we don't know. We will call family solidarity or sacrifice for the people we know, but the solidarity of a global society that are ready to pay taxes or contributions for people that they don't know. Of course, that doesn't mean that there's singularity. That means that we are capable of discovering something that we have in common with people that we don't know. And the solidarity works better in those societies that are culturally more homogeneous and in those societies that are smaller. In Europe, the countries that have solidarity are the smallest. The ones that are smaller, the opposite examples are the US or Brazil, where there's lack of solidarity, many differences, many societies, a large population. So the solidarity is not the opposite of individualism, but we have the political will or capacity to build a common scenario. How can I say this? An old French sociologist said that solidarity has a utilitarian dimension and a symbolic dimension. That symbolically we make sacrifice, and we observe that the countries to which you have alluded is not acquired due to social inequalities or important regional inequalities, and also due to cultural differences that are prevalent. So my feeling is that there's a political dimension in terms of solidarity and a symbolic. That in firstly. Secondly, this last thing I'm going to comment follows an economist that died years ago, Mr. Wilkinson, who showed that equality was good for health. The more equity in a society, the health will be better. So how can we explain this? Well, demonstrate that the progress made in the areas of health measured by life expectancy, which is the most common indicator. It's linked to the progress of medicine and the progress in the access to health health treatment in rich countries. We have high-level hospitals where people can get care there. But the progress in terms of health is linked to the progress of their basic living conditions, the progress in nutrition, the progress made in water quality, any progress made in the vaccination coverage that make that this is more important than the progress in the scope of medicine. That was his thesis, and the example of the US is quite a good example. Today, a country where there is a high performance medicine with excellent hospitals, but this is the same time where the life expectancy is dropping because people don't eat well, people don't have good nutrition, where people make an excessive use of drugs and medications. And of course, these are the poor who take these medications and don't have adequate nutrition. Their obesity rates with large people. In the 1960s, the poorer you are, the slimmer you were. And the richer you were, the fatter you were. But nowadays, this has changed. It's the opposite. The poor are obese and the rich are much slimmer. In my opinion, is that there's a significant political problem. And everyone has alluded that we need to mobilize the population, people need to participate, etc., etc. But I think that there's an issue from acting first in terms of medicine and second in the living conditions that improve health.
Je veux dire, il ne faudrait pas créer des
And
systèmes
perhaps, or well, maybe we don't have to create a system that allows one that always receives treatment. People live and are always ill. I don't know if you get my grip. I look at the efforts that have been done, and I'm aware of the political problems at present to achieve to a consensus. I think that you, Federico, who talk about this complicated topic, there are interests that are important. The rich have interest to go to good hospitals, and the poor are concerned of having a good quality of water, be vaccinated, and to have adequate nutrition. So I think that this is an issue of mobilizing political capacities, and I think that today we see that in most of the countries throughout the world, and I'm somewhat pessimistic, I must say, and I have the impression that governments have a low political will. And my feeling that the governments have the resources, but are politically will to come to agreements that allow them to balance the situation. That's all I have to say. I admire everything that has been done, and I would like to tell you, our friend from Bolivia, that I agree with traditional medicine, and at the same time, I agree with antibiotics, with the use of antibiotics. Es todo lo que tengo que comentar. No soy un experto en el ámbito. I'm not an expert in health, and my apologies.
Muchas gracias, querido profesor.
Thank you, dear Professor
Nos han
Dubé.
llegado, muchas preguntas.
We have many questions. I would like to
Para comentarle de dos ideas que se han
tell you
reiterado.
about
No
two
sé si, por
ideas,
favor,
and
puede
could
hacer
you
una reflexión
please
alrededor de
reflect
estos
on
temas que
these
han
two
reiterado en las
topics
preguntas de las y los participantes.
from the questions of
Una de
the
ellas tiene que ver
audience, and one
con
of them
los
has to do
mecanismos
with
de organización social
what social
y
organization mechanisms or
gubernamental
government
desde su
intervention
perspectiva son más
from your
eficaces
perspective
para
are more
evitar o
effective
superar desigualdades
to
y avanzar
overcome
en la justicia
inequalities
social.
and move
Y
ahead
la
in
otra
social
pregunta
justice.
tiene que ver con el
And the
racismo.
other question has to do with
Podríamos hacer
racism.
una reflexión
Could
si
you
influyendo el
reflect if
racismo, la
racism still
desigualdad y
influences
las
inequalities in Europe?
Alors, le racisme a une influence sur les inégalités en Europe.
Racism
Tout a une influence sur les
influences
inégalités.
the inequalities in Europe.
Je veux dire que
Everything
au
influences
niveau de la
inequality.
sociologie des inégalités,
I would like to tell
on
you
n'est
that
jamais déçu.
when you look at the
Ça marche,
theology of inequalities,
c'est-à-dire que
the inequalities exist all the time. There
race, de religion,
gender inequalities, religion inequalities,
tout fait
sexual inequalities, of
Donc, il
absolutely
faut faire
everything.
très,
There's
très
these
attention.
inequalities in everything.
Et
We
moi,
need
je
to be
trouve
very
que,
careful on the effect.
chez moi, en Europe,
And
un point un peu
I
compliqué.
believe that in Europe,
Si vous étudiez les sondages d'opinion
complicated.
sur la longue période,
If we look at the long-term surveys
10,
between 1970
vous voyez que les
to
idées
date,
racistes ou les idées
you will see
les
that the
opinions
racist
racistes ou les
or
opinions
sexist or racist opinions and the
les gens
sexist
sont de moins
opinions
en moins
have
racistes.
reduced.
Les gens sont de
People
moins en moins
are less racist, are
D'accord
less sexist,
Donc, les gens
right?
sont de plus en plus intelligents.
So
Ils sont de moins en
people
moins
are somewhat more
intelligents,
intelligent,
racistes, etc. Mais si
are
vous
less
regardez les
racist.
pratiques
But
sexistes
with,
ou les
if we
pratiques
look
racistes, elles ne
at
bougent
the
pas.
sexist or racist practices, they have not changed.
Ce qu'il faut bien comprendre, c'est que les pratiques
So
racistes ou les
we
pratiques
need to
sexistes
understand
ne
is
sont
the
pas
racist
le
or
reflet
sexist
des opinions
practices do not
sexistes
reflect the
racistes,
opinion,
mais elles sont le
sexist or
reflet
racist,
des conditions de vie.
but do
C'est les
reflect
conditions de vie qui font que les gens sont
life
plus
conditions. And
sexistes.
these are the
Je vais
ones
prendre un exemple.
that make people to be racist or
Les
sexist.
Français
Let me give you an
ne
example.
sont
The
pas
French
tellement racistes à l'égard
are not too racist
des
in terms of the black, of the
Ils ont des
Afro
amis africains.
people that come from Africa.
L'homme le plus
They have
populaire en
African
France
friends.
est un footballeur africain. Pas un problème.
We have a
Tous les Africains
football
vivent dans
players
les
from
mêmes
Africa, and
écoles,
we have no problem with that.
les mêmes écoles.
And they live
Que tous les Blancs vont
in
dans
the
les
same
mêmes
district,
écoles, les
the
mêmes
same
écoles.
schools,
Vous avez
in the same district with white people,
automatiquement.
and we have
Je vais
racist
prendre un autre exemple.
behaviors that are automatic. And let me give you an
L'égalité
example.
scolaire entre les hommes et les femmes
School
est
equality
presque parfaite.
between men and women,
Les femmes même sont meilleures à
almost the
l'école
same or
que les
perfect.
Mais on
Even
constate
women
cette
do
égalité entre les hommes
better
et les
in school than men. But
femmes ne s'est pas
this
traduite
equality
par une
between men and
égalité
women
dans les
is
emplois.
not translated in
Métiers de femmes
equality in
et des métiers
employment.
d'hommes. Et donc les inégalités,
There are jobs for women and for men,
alors que les
and
opinions
in permanent
sont pas
the inequality prevails despite
femmes. Je ne sais pas
the
si
opinions are not
ce que je dis est
hostile
est
to
ce que
women.
je crois.
I don't know if this
Donc,
is
c'est de
clear for you.
penser toujours
That is why that
que les gens ont
instead
des
of thinking
conduites
that
négatives, ce
people
sont des idées négatives.
have a negative behavior due to they have negative ideas,
dans lesquelles,
we need to create living conditions where
plutôt que de,
we can generate
plutôt que de
equality
penser que c'est dans les
more than
représentations
thinking
idéologiques que se pratiquent les choses.
that the
Je fais partie des sociologues
representations on
qui
things that
croient
are
que les
being
gens
carried out.
sont
I'm
assez
part of those
pragmatiques,
sociologists that
les
believe
acteurs sont assez
that
rationnels.
people are very
Et
pragmatic,
c'est pas les idées qui les font
that we're
réagir,
rational,
c'est les
and
conditions
are
dans
not
lesquelles ils
the
vivent.
ideas that make us react, but the conditions under which they live.
Gracias, querido profesor, por esa
Thank you, dear
explicación tan
professor,
detallada
for
alrededor de
this
todos los
interesting response
desafíos para lograr la
with regards to
transformación
the
en la vida
challenges to
cotidiana
obtain
de los
its
seres
transformation in the
y cómo
daily life,
hacemos y se hace
in what we do,
día a día.
in what we done on a daily
Gracias,
basis.
querido profesor
Thank
François
you, dear
Dubé,
Professor
a los
Francois Dubet,
miembros de la mesa
to all the
andina
speakers of the
por todas
Andean
las
table.
preguntas
We
realizadas.
thank for the
No alcanzamos
questions.
a responderlas
We were not
todas,
able to
las
respond
tendremos
all,
en
but we
cuenta
will consider
para
them
definir los temas
to
que
define the
queden
topics in the
pendientes de ver y
coming
mejoramos la
webinars.
planificación y
We value the
entonces para
participation.
cerrar este espacio de
And to
preguntas,
close this
quiero pedirle
Q&A,
al
I will
profesor
ask
François Dubé
Professor
que nos
Francois
deje un
Dubé
mensaje
leave
final
us a
en
final
los
message in
minutos
1
que nos
minute or
quedan.
2 minutes, please.
Je n'ai aucun message à donner. Je suis très heureux de vous avoir.
I haven't anticipated any
les
final
ne
message.
sont pas bien
Well, it's been a great pleasure.
les pays d'où vous venez. Il y en a
Fortunately,
quelques-uns que je
I'm
connais
not
bien,
aware about
je suis très attaché.
your countries. I only
Voilà,
know
je
one
suis
of them
arrivé
to
au
which
Chili dans
feel
une
quite
période politiquement
together because I've
très
worked in
difficile
Chile
et voilà, je suis
for
très
a politically
un
different,
peu
difficult
surpris, voilà.
period,
Mais
and I
je suis très, très
feel
heureux d'avoir pu vous écouter et j'ai le sentiment d'être
happy. For me, it's been a pleasure to hear all the participation, and I have a feeling of being be more intelligent at the end of this meeting. I've learned a lot. I would like to thank the interpreter that have worked a lot.
Muchas gracias, querido profesor François
Thank you, dear
Dubé.
Professor Dubert.
El agradecimiento
We
por las
thank
excelentes
all for the
exposiciones.
excellent
Recibimos
speakers
muchas
today.
felicitaciones
We
de
have
los
received
networks
many
mundiales. Muchas gracias por
congratulations from the
participar
networks. Thank you
todos
very much,
por las
Professor Dubé, to all
exposiciones de
the
hoy, también al
speakers,
equipo del Organismo Andino de
and to the
Desarrollo
team of the
y a
Horas
todas las
Conu
personas que
team,
participaron
and to all
en
the
la
people who
actividad.
participate in this
Agradecemos
activity,
también
which
por
has
su
been possible
compromiso
thanks
con
to
el
the commitment with the
agradecimiento
Andean and Latin American
internacional.
integration.
Cedo la palabra a la doctora
Now,
Marisela Maki,
Dr.
coordinadora
Marisela
del
Malki
Comité
has the
Nacional del
floor to
Organismo
close
Andino
this
de
webinar on
Desarrollo
behalf
para
of the Indian
finalizar
Health
esta
Organization and
excelente
Politinane
jornada.
Agreement. Go ahead, Dr. Marisela.
Gracias, Bertita. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Bertita.
Je vais vous prier de m'excuser, mais je vais vous laisser.
Me tengo que
Merci
retirar.
beaucoup.
Me tengo que retirar. I have to leave. My apologies.
Solo expresarle nuestro agradecimiento
Express
por
our
este momento.
thanks.
Efectivamente, ya nos hemos pasado el tiempo previsto.
We have exceeded the
Sin
time.
embargo, es un tema
However, this is an
importantísimo que nos
important
ha
topic
permitido hacer
that have allowed us to
este abordaje desde diferentes partes de la
this
parte
approach from
contextualizadora
different
y la parte ya de
topics from the context and the
nuestros países.
experiences of the countries.
Importantísimo todo lo que nos ha
Very important what
mencionado el profesor Dubé,
Professor
y
Dubé
también
mentioned,
nuestro
and
agradecimiento
also
a cada uno de
our
los
thanks to
representantes de los
each
países
of
que
the
han
one of the representatives, Vivian Camacho
participando muy
from
activamente
Bolivia,
en el
who
trabajo de la
actively
mesa
participates
andina, intersectorial y en los otros comités
editorial
de
table in the other
desarrollo sostenible.
committees of the Andean Health,
Lo que es
presenting
importante
what is
para
important
Bolivia y para esta
Bolivia
región andina
and for the
es la
Andean
medicina
region,
tradicional,
traditional
ancestral,
ancestral medicine
en esta época, ¿no? Que incluso ha
in this
mencionado el
time.
uso de la telemedicina,
Mentioned the use of
sus beneficios, que ha
telemedicine,
sido
and
importantísimo
this has been very important with the
también
pandemic.
recuperar eso, ¿no? Chile con su
Chile,
representación
with
de la política
representation
sanitaria,
of health or
también
sanitary
ha
planning,
demostrado cómo está
also
avanzando
showed us the
en el
progress made
plan
in their
nacional de desarrollo
national
con sus
plan for
objetivos
health,
importantes, igualmente
their
Colombia con el
important
desarrollo
goals.
que ya viene trabajando
Similarly,
desde hace
Colombia
tiempo
with
con
their
puntos
observatory
muy importantes
that's been active for so
y
long,
mucha
and
información que
provides
nos ha
important
dado
information
recomendaciones,
for
y
decision
igualmente
making.
Ecuador que nos ha
Ecuador also, who told us about the importance of citizen participation in health, which is a line that we all want to have present in decision making. And Peru, Albertita mentioned, we had Federico, the president of the roundtable against poverty, was the who inspired us to have this Andean roundtable and have showed us how the space has been included in the country. And we also had a presentation of Carlos Ayestas, because of health insurance, bridge, and how much progress has been done in recent years. I think that there's a lot of work to be done by analyzing and evaluating, and from each of our spaces, and the Horas Cono is open to continue enriching this effort in order to contribute. So we walk towards what we want is social justice. In that regard, we thank each one of the participants and from those of following us from different parts of the world. And we would also like to thank the entire team of the Horas Cono that makes this possible week per week. And we invite you for the next webinar that on March 7th, the coming week, we won't have a webinar. And the next one will be March 7, Tuesday, March 7, 11 a.m., the new pandemic treaty. Why do we need it, and what will be our contribution? This is March 7th at 11 a.m. So we say goodbye and thank you again. See you soon.